you've ever done? I made me a little list this week as I pondered that question. What's the hardest work you've ever done in your life? I would say putting hay bales in the barn loft when it's 95 degrees outside. That's pretty tough. Some of you know all about that, back when you used to use square bales. Being a brick mason's labor, also when it's 95 degrees, especially when they're laying 12-inch block and you're mixing mortar and building scaffolding. I remember as a boy trying to earn a hiking merit badge for Boy Scouts, and my brother and I did a 20-mile hike from Shelby to Foxton and back on a Saturday. I thought that was pretty tough at the time. We wouldn't really want to do it today. And then I thought about all-nighters when I was in college and seminary preparing for exams. I'm not like some of you. I had to study. I know there are a lot of you who are geniuses, but I had to study. I had to dig. I had to work. Rhonda's not here. She's in Asheboro babysitting. I wondered how she would answer that. Maybe childbirth 3 times, labor and delivery, taking care of Allison when things were so touch and go with her. Being a caregiver, just being a caregiver is hard work, isn't it? So how would you answer that question? What is the hardest work you've ever done? We want to suggest to you today, or we want to talk to you today for a few minutes about the hard work of the church. Now, let me be clear about something. We're saved by grace, and grace alone. We are not saved by works. Okay, let's say that up front. God sent Jesus, and Jesus died on the cross, and He rose from the grave, and aren't we glad He did? And through that, we are saved from our sins, and we have abundant and eternal life, and that's available to anyone. God has made that wonderful provision and possibility for all people. But once we are saved, what happens? We go to work. Grace works. Faith works. And here's my question. Could we work harder as Christians and as the church? I'm going to answer my own question. I think we can. I think we can and should and must if we're going to do what God has called us to do. You would probably laugh if you read my sermon notes this morning, because the next paragraph in my sermon notes says, time change weekend, the unofficial beginning of spring. God was laughing at me this morning, wasn't He? That's what's in my notes. And growing season. And this is a series on growing season, and it is. This is growing season for us personally and as a church and in so many ways. We're looking at some tips. Last week's tip, strong as an oak, flexible as a willow. We might bend, but we will not break. And today, growing tip number 2, hard work and working together. Anything we do that's worth anything involves hard work, doesn't it? And certainly that's true of the church and true of our Christian life. Think about it in 3 parts. Turn with me, please, to 1 Corinthians 3. By the way, Isaiah 35 gives us a glimpse of the fruition of that work. What's going to happen eventually? God's work and our work. But Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 3 what's involved. First of all, the hard work of planting, the hard work of watering, and the hard work of cultivating. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. Paul says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. The hard work of planting. You see, Paul planted the gospel. He was a pioneer. He planted the gospel where no one had ever done that before. And it was tough. If you read the letters to the Corinthians, Paul said it was so hard he felt the sentence of death. He thought he was going to die. But he took the gospel as a pioneer to places where the gospel had never been. It was brand new. He broke ground. Well, planting is hard work. It's true in your garden. It's true if you're planting crops. You can Google this. You can go on the internet. 5 easy steps to a no-work garden. It's on there. Or you can look up a no-work garden. I want to tell you something. My mom and daddy were gardeners. I grew up gardening. I still love to garden. I still love to get my hands dirty. And I put on my blue jeans and I put on my long sleeve shirt and I've got my straw hat. And when I go out there, it's therapeutic. But I sweat. I don't perspire. I sweat. It's work. And so it is in the church. If we're going to plant the seeds of Jesus and the seeds of the gospel, it involves hard work, labor. Now, I know we need to set examples for others. We need to have a good attitude all the time, yes. But if we're going to tell people about Jesus, if we're going to sell the church, if we're going to be on mission, guess what? It's hard work. And are we willing to do it? Are we willing to do it? Am I or you? Many of you have read some of Mark Batterson's books. He is the pastor of National Community Church in Washington, D.C. One of his earliest books from a few years ago, In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. Pretty good title, right? In a Pit with a Lion on a snowy day. He tells about taking a team on a mission trip to Ethiopia. And all those going were a little fearful. There was political unrest in Ethiopia. They were going to subject themselves, of course, to the diseases that might be in a third world country. One team member was particularly concerned. Her name was Sarah. And Sarah wrote these words, something like, I'm not an evangelist. I don't have any special gifts. I don't have 3,000 miles to pay, or $3,000 laying around to pay for a mission trip. She said, I've never been west of the Mississippi, certainly never been on the other side of the world. She said, I need my electricity. I need my water, my running water. She said, I could think of 1,000,000 reasons not to go. I went for one reason. I felt like God called me to go. And so she went, and they went. And they planted a church in the capital city of Ethiopia. They built a mud hut for an Ethiopian grandmother. They played duck, duck, goose with those precious children, and they worshiped with those people. And Mark and Sarah both said they got into their worship like they'd never seen before. They were excited about the Lord's Day and about worshiping God. And Sarah didn't die in a plane crash. She didn't get sick. She didn't have some crazy disease. Now, she did get pooped on by a baboon. And not many people can say that. There were about 50 baboons in the village where they were working, and one of them planted a bomb right on her. How many people can go to a party and for an icebreaker can say, I got pooped on by a baboon? Not many. The hard work of planting the gospel. Am I willing to do that? Are you? And then the hard work of watering. Paul says again in verse 6, 1 Corinthians 3, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. You see, Paul was the pioneer. Apollos worked in the established church. He nurtured Christians that perhaps Paul had brought into the church. So Paul planted the gospel, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. Both were important. Watering's important, isn't it? It's essential to growth. Consistency's important. Think about corn, if you will. You plant a kernel of corn. what happens down there in the dark earth? It germinates and it sprouts, and something like a blade of grass pops through the ground. You ever notice that? And that blade of grass grows and becomes a fibrous stalk, and has many leaves or blades of grass. And then there's tasseling of the corn. By the way, some varieties can be 15 feet tall. And then there's the forming of the ear and the silk. It's quite an interesting process. Have you ever seen a vibrant, healthy field of corn? It was lush and it was green, but just about the time, just before maturity, there was a drought. What happens? You pass there after a week or so, no rain, and that lush and green field of corn is now dry and yellow and brown and ugly. And if it doesn't get any rain, maybe hideous. You see, rain, too much rain can make it rot. But water is important because that water takes nutrients through those plants, right? So it is in the church. Planting the seeds of the gospel is so important. It's hard work. But watering is hard work, and it's essential as well, because the watering process is where we nurture each other in the faith. It's so important that we be here this morning and any Lord's Day, because we're nurturing each other. I need to be here for me. But we come also because we nurture each other. We encourage each other. And that's hard work. And it's ongoing work. Consistency, water. It's so vital and so important. Let me ask you 5 questions this morning. Are you and I willing to do the hard work of prayer and devotion that planting and watering demands? Are we willing? Sometimes I wonder about the church today, the traditional church. Are we willing to do the hard work of prayer and devotion that's demanded? Number 2, are we willing to get out of our comfort zones? Think about this and tell somebody about Jesus, or invite somebody to church, to the choir, to our mission group, to worship, to Sunday school this week. You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to get out of your routines. Are we willing, number 3, to come to worship? Because we know that our being here is vital, but also we're nurturing others. Fourthly, are we willing to be a spiritual leader in our homes and in our businesses and our schools? Are we willing today to be a spiritual leader? And number 5, are we willing to bring our tithes and our offerings? Because where our treasure is, there will our heart be also. Our answers to those 5 questions probably tells us whether we're willing to do the hard work of the church or not. Is that true? Probably how I answer those 5 questions will determine whether I'm willing to do the hard work of the church or not. Hey, Lifeway did a survey last year, Lifeway Research. Found this pretty interesting. 2,000 people who do not go to church, they asked them what it would take to get them to church, possibly. Listen to this. 51% said a personal invitation from a friend or a family member. Only 18% said Facebook. Now, Facebook's great. Social media is great, has its place. But think about that. Even in 2017, 51% said, what would it take to get me to come to church? A personal invitation, not from a preacher, though preachers need to do that, but from a family member or a friend. Am I willing, are you willing to do the hard work of planting and watering? And thirdly, the hard work of cultivating. Look at verse 9 with me. I find this so interesting. 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says, for we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. Did you hear what he said? We're God's fellow workers. We're God's building. We're God's temple if you read on down. But he says right there in the middle of verse 9, we are God's field. We're God's farm. You ever thought about that? Let me say it one more time. We are a farm. We are God's farm. What does a farm have to have? Farmers? Cultivation. Else it's in disrepair. There has to be weeding, there has to be fertilizing, there has to be tilling constantly. Cultivation. The same with us. If we're going to be the church, every day, the hard work of planting, the hard work of watering, the hard work of cultivating, which means we have to do some weeding, get rid of jealousy. He talks about that in this chapter. Get rid of quarreling, get rid of anything that divides or separates. And we have to come together, pull together, be in harmony, be in unity as the church. I could talk for hours about this, and I know you don't want me to. But I believe these are wonderful days for Florence Church. I do. We're searching for staff members, and God's got some great things in store. We're getting our debt. We've had a huge debt, but we're getting our debt down to a manageable level. It's a wonderful thing. And the fields are white for harvest. The future's bright. But guess what? We have to cultivate all that. And we have to come together. And we have to pull together. And we have to weed those things that might separate or might hinder us. Jealousy or quarreling, anything like that, Paul says. We have to rise above the fleshly nature and be in the spiritual realm. Be walking in step with the Spirit of God. And if so, anything is possible for this church. Let me say it again. Anything is possible for Florence Church. Let me close with a couple stories this morning. You like Lucy and Linus? The old Peanuts comic strip. Remember the one where Lucy walked in and told Linus to change the TV channel? And Linus said, "Why should I allow you to charge in here and tell me to do something like that?" And you remember what Lucy said? Lucy said, "These 5 fingers. Individually," she said, "they are nothing, but when I curl them up like this, they are a weapon of great force." And Linus said, "What channel do you want?" And then he turned where she couldn't see him, and he looked at his hand and he said, "Why can't you guys get organized like that?" I like that, don't you? So just imagine, if those of us here this morning come together as one, cultivating, planting, and watering, imagine what God will do. And then one other. May 24th, 1965. A 13.5-foot boat was launched in a marina in Falmouth, Massachusetts. You might have read this story. The boat was called the Tinkerbell. And a man by the name of Robert Manry had a dream. He was going to take the smallest craft ever and cross to England, cross the Atlantic. 13.5-foot boat. He didn't tell many people because he figured most folks would try to talk him out of such a thing. He did tell his wife, Virginia, what he was doing. You see, he had been the editor of the Cleveland Plains Dealer. He'd been sitting at that desk for 10 years, and he had a dream. He wanted to do something else, and he wanted to cross the Atlantic in that boat. Well, it was a rough 78 days. Sleepless nights, loneliness, hallucinations. The rudder broke 3 times. Storms. He was thrown out of the boat. Had it not been for a rope tied around his waist, he would have been gone. But as he crossed the Atlantic, he wondered, what will I do when I get there? He imagined he would check into a hotel, have dinner, and the next day see if the Associated Press wanted to pick up his story. That's what he thought. Well, lo and behold, word had gotten out. And when he got to England, 300 boats with horns blaring greeted him. 40,000 people were waiting on shore, and guess who was on the dock? His wife, Virginia, his biggest fan. And he proved that when you work together, dreams really do come true. And so it is with the church. If those of us here this morning are willing to do the hard work of the church, planting and watering and cultivating, we're on the verge of some great, great days here at Florence Baptist Church and in our individual spiritual lives as well. Here's our question as we close. Are we willing? Are we willing to get our hands dirty and do the hard work of God's church this week? There's no better hymn to sing right now than 488.